Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Like so many things that are incredibly dangerous, it sounds like a lot of fun when you think about it, but when you actually experience it, you find yourself in real danger. I'm talking this time about claims of infallibility. Wouldn't it be great if not only you could believe that you were right all the time, but you could get other people to believe the same thing? Wouldn't it be wonderful if other people had an obligation to believe what you say because you have attained to this status of infallibility? Like I say, it sounds tempting. But what it actually is an unbearable weight. And by unbearable, I don't merely mean really heavy. I mean not able to be borne. It's not possible to carry that weight, and it leads you into places that no one wants to go. What kind of places? Well, here's the problem. Because we're not infallible, because we do make mistakes, if we take the posture that we are beyond the capacity of making mistakes, what are we supposed to do when we make a mistake? Let me give you an example, clear example. Most people don't know this, but the truth is that Roman Catholicism became fully and formally, and I'm going to argue immutably, apostate, that is no longer a true church, not at the beginning of Luther's work, not when they excommunicated Luther, but rather during the Counter-Reformation, when they approved the findings of the Council of Trent, including the sixth session of the Council of Trent, which says, if any man says that a man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law, let him be anathema, let him be damned. Now, that's bad. And I think most people, even people with a nice warm fuzzy sense of, what's the word for it, ecumenicity towards Rome, would recognize, hey, that was not their best moment. They really stepped in it, and it's such a shame. But what they'll do is they'll turn around and say, well, look, Vatican II is another council, and Vatican II no longer describes Protestants as damnable heretics, but refers to Protestants as separated brethren. Okay, well, here's what else Vatican II says unambiguously. Vatican II says, look, if you're reading this, and you're thinking that we've changed anything, then you've misunderstood. We haven't changed anything. You see, the problem is if Vatican II corrects the Council of Trent, then not only does the Council of Trent lose all its authority, but Vatican II loses all its authority, and everything else that might be ascribed to the infallible tradition of the Roman Church also loses its authority. See, when you claim infallibility, if you're caught in one mistake, your claim blows up in your face, and you have nothing left to do except try to bluster your way through it or try to bully your way through it. If you've read George Orwell's 1984. You'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. It is an outstanding book on innumerable levels, and I strongly commend it to you. But in this particular dystopian novel, looking at a future in which Big Brother is a kind of brutal dictator over much of the Western world, our hero, our protagonist, Winston Smith, serves in a government agency called the Ministry of Truth. And his job, in part, is to correct history, to put things that are no longer true into a memory hole. So, for instance, let's say, in fact, this is actually what happened. Let's say that Lenin and Stalin and who's the other fella? Lenin, Stalin, and the other fella were working together early on in the time of the Russian Revolution, and eventually the other fella, whose name I can't remember, it's got into the memory hole, he falls out of favor, and the Russian historians literally go and crop him out of photos of these three sort of founding fathers of Soviet Russia. So that's what Winston Smith did, and that's sort of what you have to do when you claim this level of infallibility. Now, I'm willing to grant you that this is, I've said it before, in fact, that Rome very rarely, if ever at all, steps up and says, okay, now we're speaking infallibly. You ask for a list of those doctrines which tradition infallibly affirms, and you will not get one. So this is not a claim that's typically made, but there are sort of levels by which this claim has been made. And I'm thinking specifically about the fact checkers that put things in the memory hole and keep us believing what they want us to believe on social media. We have entered into a bizarre time when again, leaders in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the other places that are too new and too cool for me, feel it perfectly legitimate to censor or at the very least label what they consider disinformation. I know when I go to visit Twitter, there on the right-hand side of the page, it's not at all unusual to see some sort of message saying fact checkers have demonstrated that this is not so. Well, how do we know which fact checkers to trust? And the truth of the matter is that those fact checkers have been wrong already. This phenomenon has only existed for a year or so, and yet they've made grievous errors where they said this and they said that, and it just wasn't true. And in fact, it's so clearly not true that now they have to say the opposite, but then they have to hide the fact that they used to say the opposite. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's that burden. Oh, they tell us, if you get the vaccine, you will not get sick. And people came and said, yeah, that's not true. And they were kicked off the internet, virtually. That's what happens. You know, we all err from time to time. There's not a one of us who is infallible. There's never going to be a time when we will be living on this earth and can speak with absolute certainty, infallibly, about things happening here and now. People disagree. That doesn't mean there's no truth. Doesn't mean that at all. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. It doesn't mean truth is unknowable. What it does mean is that we can't know that we know everything with absolute certainty. I'm skeptical about the general, what's the word for it, narrative about COVID and vaccines. I'm not an expert on it at all, but I'm skeptical about it. And one of the reasons I'm skeptical about it is precisely what I'm talking about. When someone feels the need to beat their chest about their qualifications and their authority and their fact-checky approval ratings, it makes me nervous. You know, I've worked in ministries of various sorts for most of my life, and I've been in various levels of leadership in those organizations. And it's always been my perspective. It's always been my hope that whenever I'm in any kind of situation like that, not that I be given the authority to make decisions, but that I'm given the freedom to try to persuade those who make the decisions. It's always my view that if I can't persuade somebody of something, then either A, I may be wrong, or B, I'm just glad it's not something that I'm going to be responsible for. That's a whole different thing. I want to try to persuade you. This is why I'm doing this podcast. I'm trying to persuade you. I thought about today doing a segment on mass formation psychosis. And that led me to thinking about, well, why is Dr. Malone talking about mass formation psychosis? I don't know whether it's true or not. But in fact, when I was reading about it, I was just reading, well, all the experts say, all leading psychologists say, there's no such thing. And I'm thinking, well, have you heard of the fallacy called the no true Scotsman fallacy? Here's how it goes. No true Scotsman would ever eat oatmeal with brown sugar. And suppose I show you a snapshot of William Wallace eating oatmeal with brown sugar. And you say, well, William Wallace is not a true Scotsman. And I said, well, why would you say that? Well, because he eats oatmeal with brown sugar. And when you define your specifics or your category by the thing you're defining it by, then that rules out any counter examples. But there are plenty of true Scotsmen who do this or who do that. So in the same way, if you say, well, no credible psychologist believes in mass formation psychosis, well, how do you know which ones are the credible ones and which ones aren't? Oh, well, that's easy. The credible ones are the ones who deny mass formation psychosis, and the ones that are not credible are the ones who believe in it. Science says COVID-19 does this, blah, 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 best fought this way, blah, 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 get this shot, get that shot, blah, 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 mask, blah, 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 blah. All credible scientists believe this. Well, how do you know who the credible scientists are? Oh, because they're the ones who believe this. Here's what I believe. I believe I can be mistaken. I believe that the people who tell me that they know what's true can also be mistaken. Again, I believe truth is knowable. But I'm asking you, not demanding, I'm asking you to be careful with those who would stand up and say, I'm the expert. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give more weight to someone who's done more study than some other person who just comes up with an idea on their own. I don't, get my information on COVID from the mailman. But neither do I think that because a guy has a PhD and MD and anything else that he has to be right. Because he doesn't. So, be careful of claims of infallibility. Flee from them yourself, you'll regret it. Be careful of claims of a level of authority that goes beyond something common to all men. I can understand things about reality. I know that there are limits, but I know that there are things I can know, and I can share those things, and I can make a case, and I can go back and forth, and I've got no problem with that at all. But jumping up and down saying, you have to believe me because, unless what follows that because is a sound argument, I don't have to believe you. And You don't believe me on today's podcast, you don't have to believe me. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.